For over 2,000 years, the vast lands of ancient China whispered stories that time itself tried to bury. Empires rose and fell, yet the rhythm of daily life, its struggles, rituals, and dreams, remained echoing in silence. This was a world shaped by philosophy and fate, where the emperor's word was law, and farmers, scholars, warriors, and poets each played their quiet part in building one of the most enduring civilizations on Earth. Beneath the splendor of dynasties and the grandeur of the Great Wall, there lived a people whose ordinary days carried extraordinary meaning. To understand what it was like to live in ancient China is to listen closely to the silence of time, where history breathes through forgotten hearts. In the age when the Yellow River still whispered its song through the heart of the Middle Kingdom, there lived two souls bound by a promise older than memory itself. One was born beneath the dragon banners of the palace, a young prince named Li Wen, destined to inherit the mandate of heaven, the sacred power believed to flow from the divine into the veins of a ruler. The other, Mai Lan, was the daughter of a humble scholar, her spirit bright as the morning mist, her heart tuned to the quiet rhythm of the world. In those days, the emperor was not merely a man. He was the living bridge between heaven and earth. Every sunrise, the people believed, rose because the emperor was in harmony with the cosmos. His breath sustained the order of the world, his virtue kept the storms from devouring the land. But for Li Wen, the weight of such belief felt like an invisible chain. From the moment he could speak, he was told he carried the sky itself upon his shoulders. Mai Lan saw him once, on a spring morning when cherry blossoms fell like whispers of old prayers. She had wandered beyond the scholars' quarter, drawn by the sound of temple bells. Their eyes met, just for an instant, but in that instant, something ancient stirred within them both. It was as if the silence of 2,000 years cracked open, revealing a truth neither could name. That night, Li Wen dreamt of a life long past, a life where he had been a peasant, and Mai Lan a healer beside a river of stars. He remembered her laughter, her promise, and her parting words, "One heaven forgets, love remembers. But dawn always returns, and dreams are no match for destiny." The prince was soon crowned emperor, his heart buried beneath robes of gold. The mandate of heaven, they said, was eternal, but only if the ruler's virtue remained pure. So Li Wen ruled with wisdom and mercy, for in his heart, he still heard Mai Lan's voice in the wind. Every decree he made carried the echo of compassion. Every temple he built was a quiet offering to her unseen presence. Yet power has a way of testing even the purest souls. When famine struck the northern plains, the emperor's advisors urged him to raise taxes, to preserve the throne at any cost. But Li Wen refused. "A ruler does not own his people," he said. "He belongs to them." His words, though gentle, challenged the iron order of the court. Enemies grew in shadows, whispers of rebellion slithered through the halls of jade. And then, one night, the stars fell silent. A rebellion ignited. The emperor, betrayed by those closest to him, fled into the wilderness, disguised as a monk. There, starving and alone, he found refuge in a small hut beside a dying river. An old woman took him in, nursing him with herbs and silence. When he looked into her eyes, he saw what lifetimes had hidden. Mai Lan had returned, not as a court lady, not as a symbol of beauty, but as a soul fulfilling her promise through ages of waiting. She did not recognize him as emperor, nor did he reveal his crown. For a few fleeting months, they lived as wanderers outside time, two souls reunited in the simplicity that heaven itself had denied them before. And when Li Wen's final day came, the wind carried his last whisper into her hands. The mandate was never mine. It was ours. Centuries later, the chronicles would record him as a just ruler, a man of divine virtue who vanished mysteriously. But what history could never capture was that the true mandate of heaven was not about power. It was about balance, compassion, and the eternal thread that binds two souls through the silence of time. In the stillness of eternity, where empires crumble and dynasties fade, their love remained, a quiet pulse beneath the rhythm of history, reminding us that even in the corridors of power, it is the heart that rules the world. Beyond the golden walls of the emperor's palace, where incense curled in quiet reverence to heaven, life in ancient China unfolded with gentle rhythm. The hum of the marketplace, the creak of wooden carts, the scent of rice steaming over open fires, these were the songs of the common people, the unseen pulse that kept the empire alive. For though history remembers the thrones and wars, it was the hands of ordinary souls that built eternity. Among those countless lives once lived were two ancient souls, Li Wen and Mei Lan, now reborn in simpler forms. Gone were the robes of silk and the burdens of crown. In this lifetime, they were a potter and a tea seller, living in a small village nestled beside a jade, green river under the quiet gaze of the mountains. Li Wen, the potter, spent his days shaping clay with closed fingers, his art guided not by ambition but by remembrance. In every bowl he crafted, there was an unspoken yearning, as if his soul still remembered the temples he once built, the empire he once ruled, and the woman he once loved. Though he could not name the ache, it lingered like a forgotten prayer beneath his ribs. Mei Lan, the tea seller, lived across the river. She rose before dawn each morning, her breath visible in the cool mist, her hands steeped in the scent of jasmine and oolong. Travellers often said her tea carried an inexplicable calm, as if it held the memory of peace itself. When she smiled, people felt the world grow a little quieter. They passed each other many times. At the market, during festivals, on quiet afternoons when the cicadas hummed and the sky burned orange. Yet, neither knew why their hearts stilled when their eyes met. In those fleeting moments, it was as if the noise of the world faded, and something ancient stirred beneath the veil of ordinary life. The village, humble as it was, lived in harmony with the Tao, the great natural flow. Families worked side by side in the fields, children played among the lotus ponds, elders told stories of dragons and immortals by firelight. There was no rush, no grand ambition, only the slow rhythm of existence itself. Life was not about conquering the world, but becoming one with it. One evening, as a festival lantern floated down the river, Li Wen noticed a figure kneeling by the water's edge, Mei Lan, releasing a lantern of her own. The candle's light shimmered against her eyes, and something inside him remembered. Not her face, not her name, but the feeling of her presence, the echo of 1,000 lifetimes ago. He approached quietly, and without words, they watched their lanterns drift together, merging into one reflection upon the water. It was a simple act, yet the air grew heavy with memory. She turned to him and said softly, "I feel as though I've known you before." Li Wen smiled, not understanding why his heart trembled. "Perhaps," he replied, "or lanterns remember what we have forgotten." From that night, they began sharing tea and stories. There was no romance as the world defines it, no promises or declarations. Only the deep, wordless recognition of souls who had crossed oceans of time to find one another again. Their connection lived in gestures, a shared silence, a passing glance, a touch of hands while pouring tea. In their village, the days continued as always. The potter shaped clay, the tea seller steeped leaves. Yet beneath that simplicity, eternity whispered. They had once ruled kingdoms and defied heaven. Now, they ruled only their hearts, and found it was enough. For the wisdom of the commoner's life was not in grandeur, but in balance. To work with the earth, to live in rhythm with the seasons, and to love without demand. Li Wen and Mei Lan, in this quiet life, had unknowingly fulfilled the lesson that even the emperors had forgotten, that the greatest power is not to command the heavens, but to live gently upon the earth. When they grew old, they passed together into the next realm, their lanterns drifting once more into the darkness. And the river carried them on, just as it always had, two reflections merging into one eternal light, flowing endlessly through the silence of time. When dynasties rose and fell like the tides of the Yellow River, wisdom became the only bridge between chaos and harmony. In ancient China, people turned not to gods or kings alone, but to the way, the eternal current that flowed through all life. The sages called it Tao, the scholars called it Li, the principle of right order, and those who truly understood it lived not in resistance, but in alignment with the quiet rhythm of existence itself. It was within this timeless current that the two ancient souls, Li Wen and Mei Lan, once again found each other, reborn this time not as rulers or workers, but as seekers of truth. Li Wen was now a wandering monk who had left behind the noise of the world in pursuit of inner stillness. Mei Lan was a calligrapher living in the mountains, her brush guided by intuition, painting not words but feelings, the invisible music between heaven and earth. Their paths crossed on a misty morning at the Temple of Still Waters, a sanctuary known to those who sought enlightenment rather than escape. The monk arrived carrying only a bamboo staff and a worn copy of the Tao Te Ching. The calligrapher was seated by the lotus pond, her paper spread before her, capturing the silence of the moment with strokes that seemed to breathe. When Li Wen saw her art, he paused, not for its beauty, but for the strange familiarity that rippled through him. Each brushstroke seemed to mirror the rhythm of his own breath, as though his soul recognized the dance upon the page. Mei Lan looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a heartbeat the world disappeared. There was no temple, no past, no self, only the feeling of reunion that words could never touch. That evening, under the lantern glow, they spoke of the way. She said, "The Tao cannot be found in temples or books. It moves in the wind, in the pulse of your own heart. It is not to be understood, but to be remembered." Li Wen nodded, the memory stirring deep within. "Then perhaps we are not learning the way," he said softly, "but remembering how to return to it." For months they lived in quiet companionship. She painted, he meditated. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. But even in silence, they were teaching each other the art of balance, the patience of stillness, the courage to let go. Together, they discovered that wisdom was not about knowing, but about unlearning, stripping away the noise of identity until only presence remained. Yet, as in every lifetime before, fate tested them. A drought swept through the region, and fear spread like wildfire. The villagers turned to the monks for answers, begging for rituals, prayers, or omens. Li Wen tried to comfort them with words of calm, reminding them that the Tao flows even through hardship. But when the rivers dried completely, the people's faith began to fracture. Some accused him of offending heaven. Others demanded miracles. Mei Lan, sensing the rising storm, took his hand and whispered, "Do not resist. Even suffering is part of the way." When Li Wen was exiled from the temple, she followed him into the wilderness, where they built a small hut beside a dying stream. There, in their solitude, they rediscovered the truth they had chased for lifetimes, that wisdom is not a shield from pain, but a mirror that reflects it without distortion. One night, under a sky that had forgotten rain, Mei Lan fell ill. Li Wen tended to her in silence, his heart heavy but still. As her breath grew faint, she smiled faintly and said, "You once ruled a kingdom, and I once poured tea. Now, we have learned what neither power nor simplicity could teach, that all paths lead home." She passed away with dawn, her spirit rising like mist from the water. Li Wen buried her beneath a flowering plum tree and meditated there for years, until he too became one with the wind, his body returning to the earth, his spirit following hers into the river of eternity. Centuries later, when the plum tree bloomed each spring, its petals would fall into the stream, floating eastward, toward the same mountains where two souls, somewhere in time, would meet again. For the Tao has no end, only circles. And those who love in truth are never truly lost. They simply continue their journey along the infinite way, where all things return to balance, and all souls return to one another. When the winds of time carried the last whispers of the old dynasties, what remained of ancient China was not only its palaces or monuments, but its spirit, the undying art of creation. To live in harmony with the Tao was not merely a matter of faith, but a rhythm that infused every craft, invention, and brushstroke. It was as if the people of that land understood something timeless, that every creation was a mirror through which eternity admired itself. And within that eternal rhythm, the two ancient souls, Li Wen and Mei Lan, were reborn once more. This time, they lived in the age of artisans, inventors, and poets, a golden period when knowledge flowed like silk through the veins of civilization. Li Wen, in this life, was an inventor, devoted to studying the movements of wind and water. Mei Lan was a poet and painter, known across villages for the ethereal light that seemed to live within her art. They did not know it yet, but their reunion was destined to shape more than their own fate. It would echo through generations. Li Wen's workshop stood beside a tranquil lake, where he studied reflections and ripples, learning how nature balanced its forces. He believed that every invention should serve harmony, not domination. The ancients built to conquer, he often said, but the wise build to remember. His creations, paper lanterns that glowed like captured moonlight, water clocks that whispered the hours instead of striking them, were imbued with gentleness. an elegance that defied the harshness of the age. Meanwhile, Mai Lan's poems wandered through villages on fragile rice paper, carried by travelers who swore her words healed the spirit. Her brush flowed like wind through bamboo, and her paintings held a mystery, though she never saw the inventor across the lake. Her art often depicted his lanterns, his hands and his face, as if memory itself had painted through her. One autumn evening, while Mai Lan was sketching by the water, a paper lantern drifted toward her from across the lake. It bore a single inscription: "The soul remembers what the mind forgets." She froze, her breath trembling, for something deep inside her stirred, a recognition that belonged to neither dream nor reason. Guided by an unseen current, she followed the lantern's glow and found Li Wen working by moonlight, his fingers stained with ink and soot. When their eyes met, time once again bent in reverence. The centuries between them dissolved like mist. They did not speak of love or destiny, they simply understood. Together, they began to create, not for power or fame, but as a prayer to remembrance. Li Wen designed instruments that captured sound. Mai Lan wrote verses that captured silence. He invented the early form of a wind harp, and she composed poems that matched its song. The people who heard their work said it felt as though heaven itself was breathing through their creations. But history, ever hungry, soon came for them. A jealous nobleman, envious of their growing influence, demanded Li Wen's designs for his court. When Li Wen refused, claiming his work belonged to the people, he was imprisoned. Mai Lan, forbidden from seeing him, sent secret poems hidden within folded fans, each verse carrying her vow: "Even if the empire forgets you, I will remember you beyond worlds." In the silence of his cell, Li Wen carved his final design into the wall, a spiral symbolizing the endless cycle of return. He passed from this world with her name upon his lips, trusting the Tao to reunite them once again. Years later, Mai Lan's final painting, unfinished, depicted two cranes flying into the horizon, wings entwined. She left it beside a stream, where the water carried it away like a promise delivered to eternity. Centuries passed. Dynasties crumbled. The inventions of that age, paper, printing, the compass, spread across the world, changing civilizations. Yet beneath those grand legacies lay something quieter, something sacred, the love of two souls who had turned creation into devotion. For the true legacy of ancient China was not only in its inventions, but in its understanding that all art, all creation, all wisdom is born from remembrance. Every poem, every lantern, every echo of beauty is a bridge between lifetimes. And so, in every era that followed, when a brush meets paper or a lantern drifts into the night sky, Li Wen and Mai Lan live again, not as figures of history, but as whispers within the soul of creation itself. For some bonds are older than time, and some stories never end. They simply change their form, shining quietly through the hands of those who still remember.